is an Australian-born artist and educator based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Using a research-informed expanded photographic practice, she constructs installations, performances, and community-engaged works that investigate knowledge and memory as a form of critical resistance in our time of neoliberal colonial capitalism. And she'll be visiting with the installation and performance class tomorrow to be able to spend some time with students and talk about the work that they're building and maybe expand more on some of your projects, if it makes sense. So her work has been exhibited at the Centre for Contemporary Photography in Melbourne, Australia, the Sydney Museum in Sydney, Australia, and the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art, to name a couple. And she currently has work on view at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh. So if you can make it to Pittsburgh, the Mattress Factory is one of my all-time favorite places to go. That's a collaboration with Luke Stettner called The State of the Sky. It's a 2-year evolving installation, and part of what they've worked on together is a darkroom that utilizes the sun through a hole cut into the roof as an experimental lab and a place for community engagement. It stands as a symbol and site for ongoing creation and transformation, and maybe you'll share about this, but they'll also be hosting classes this summer in the darkroom, which is really exciting. Calista's work is heavily research-based, with every material and movement deeply considered and significant. She is an incredible collaborator, community builder, and organizer, invested in uplifting those around her from a grassroots level. I am very pleased to have her here to share her work with you all this evening. So please join me in welcoming her. Hi y'all. Thanks for coming out. You feel really far away there. I'm going to stand over here, unfortunately. I'm going to just hit these lights real quick. It's kind of dark in here. Thank you very much to Jacqueline. I really appreciate the invitation. Also, thanks to the Kinetic Imaging Department and the Gwen Frostic School of Art for the invitation to come and speak with you all today. It's kind of really a gift as an artist. Artist talks are kind of my favorite thing to go to and also to offer. And it's really a treat to be able to be asked to come to a new site and to share the work. So thank you for making the time and energy to be here. I'm going to jump right in. The dominant narrative can be used to describe the lens in which history is told by the perspective of the dominant culture, by those holding power. A counter-narrative is a form of critical resistance that shares alternate perspectives that may be missing or underrepresented. In my work, I use counter-narratives to challenge the dominant narratives we have inherited through colonisation and neoliberalism, particularly in terms of colonisation in an Australian context. In this talk, I will share how my traditional photographic background has shifted into an expanded photographic practice where I use the image as a tool for resistance. In photography at its limits, Jodie Roberts and Natalia Brazuglia has stated that losing form, losing discipline, pushes artists to experiment with the medium's material components as well as the world beyond the camera. This is an image of Philip Brandwhite. Phil was an amateur botanist and a self-described recluse who lived in my farming community in Australia where I grew up. He spent over 30 years searching for and documenting native orchids. This is one of my favourite images of him. It was taken by his brother, Peter. Phil's work has been an important demonstration of curiosity, attention, and commitment. The word amateur in its beginnings means one who loves or to love. Phil carried this magnifying glass with him religiously. I admire Phil's practice of observation, which can be mirrored in that of a photographer. The next images I'm going to share with you were taken by Tobias Hayashi, who works with threatened species conservation and listing in Australia.
Tobias has been really generous in letting me use and incorporate his photographs into my performances and installations. There are around 1,800 native species of orchids in Australia, and orchids' colour, form and pheromones are often modelled on their specific pollinator. They are an example of a species that demonstrates the ways their lives are inextricably intertwined with other species. This is the helmet orchid, the large bird orchid, the flying duck orchid, the red beard orchid, the brindabella midge orchid, and the crimson spider orchid, Caladinia concolor, which has become a central focus of my work. Over 40% of these species are threatened with extinction in Australia. Through my friendship with Phil, he began to share his work with me. Across his life, he created an extensive collection of botanical specimens, illustrations, and field diaries. Phil's botanical illustrations were possible through close studies of stem and flower cuttings, which he collected both locally and across Australia. With Phil's permission, I worked with his collection to create an extensive digital archive of his little-known work. From this archive, I've been moving in ever-widening circles to understand this collection as both a demonstration of attention, care and interspecies relation, and a collection with a legacy rooted in colonial violence and extraction. This was a place to begin, a way to research orchids and the myriad relationships they build across species as an embodiment of community, with the specific goal of centering non-human narratives as critical historical actors. To look at an orchid is to look at ourselves, a way to understand the past, present, and future, with the understanding that what these orchids are currently experiencing through mass extinction, we are also enacting upon ourselves. Their lives cannot be separated from ours. The Unknown and the Unnamed is a 2-hour and 45-minute lecture performance that collates this research into a central work. While this work began with Philip Brandwhite's collection, it is now expanded to draw from the oral histories of amateur botanists, conservationists, farmers, and scientists. Some key thinkers that helped me to undertake an approach to this work was Anna Tsing's The Mushroom at the End of the World, which has been critical in how to centre a narrative on a specific species and how to grapple with complexity. Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble emphasises the importance of story, interspecies and non-human narratives, and how ideas of symbiosis can be used to demonstrate relation. Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass offered the poetics of understanding the limitations of scientific knowledge and how Indigenous life worlds can help us unlearn violent ways of thinking and being. Victor Stephenson's Fire Country makes explicit the ways Australian Indigenous cultural fire practitioners are using fire to read and manage land and species health. And Walter Mignolo and Catherine Walsh's On Decoloniality has offered numerous examples of how art can serve as a fissure or a crack in the colonial matrix of power. The archive is a kind of memory. Phil attempted to move these orchids into the future, to me and to you. But what is missing in the archive? What has been lost and forgotten? What of the experiences, the relations, the exchanges that remain unknown? You couldn't escape the smell. It blanketed the air, our clothes, our hair. For over 6 weeks, I could look directly at the sun. On the worst day, I was on a truck at the top end of the valley. We had fire approaching from 3 sides of the valley, and we thought it would be the day that everything would burn. I watched the fire move out of the bush onto cleared farmland. It moves so quickly and intensely, like water spreading across a table when you knock over a glass. Orchid delirium, often also called orchid mania, was only possible through the expanding of imperial networks of trade and colonisation. In Orchid, A Cultural History, Jim Endersby states, "Behind all this was money, vast fortunes, often built on the scarred and suffering backs of African slaves, which brought Europe wealth on an unprecedented scale. How much of the knowledge I'm sharing with you today was made possible through slavery, through the colonising of Indigenous people and the taking and owning of earth and their ecological communities." To draw from Christina Sharp's In the Wake on Blackness and Being, how are we to come to understand the complexity and complicity of an event that is still ongoing? What does saving a species actually mean? When is a species saved? And if an orchid's home and their subsequent relationships do not have a future, might they have to be saved forever? What does saving a species in perpetuity look like? And what would happen to this species after we are gone? Conservation scientist Noosh Farida has stated that for the orchid family, many species face imminent extinction. The crimson spider orchid is no exception. While the threats to this orchid are difficult to map, what has caused these threats is not humans. More accurately, humans from the period of colonisation to the present. White colonial settlement, a way of living, a way of being, an idea. In the essay Playing with Knowledge, Sophie Cedar writes, "What does knowledge do? The pursuit of it, the having and exposing of it, the receiving again of knowledge of what one already knows. How, in short, is knowledge performative?" Up to 7 performers work in unison to move over 1,200 images on and off analogue overhead projectors, while field recordings and interviews play aloud, and I narrate an 85-page creative non-fiction text that I researched and wrote. The performance translates scientific concepts through personal story for a general audience. I use symbiosis, which is defined as a mutually beneficial relationship between different organisms, as a metaphor for community, challenging dominant narratives of human individualism. I share how bodies across species are made and unmade by one another: orchid, cow, fungi, human, wasp. Across the narrative, I explain the importance of symbiosis in challenging dominant narratives falsely drawn from scientific investigations about the biological individual and used to perpetuate ideas of human individualism and competition as the central way we function in the world. These false ideas have been used in fields like economics, philosophy, and politics, and have gone on to deeply shape how we think and live in the US. By looking specifically at the endangered crimson spider orchid and their ecology, I also trace historical and contemporary threats to this orchid, stemming from the ongoing violence of settler colonialism, including bushfires, introduced species, global warming, overcollecting, agriculture, land clearing, and forms of extraction, just to name a few. I make visible the ways that imperialism has been inseparable from botanical collecting and knowledge production, revealing for white audiences the way that racial and environmental violence are deeply intertwined. This work is an example of the expanded field of photography. This work sits between the lecture performance and expanded cinema, allowing me to draw on the power of an image and challenge the static photographic object and its encompassing abstractions. I see this form as reflective of contemporary artist practices where artists and photographers are taking up the role of researcher, archivist, curator, educator, and historian to share complex narratives that cannot be held in a single photograph or photographic series. With each new iteration of this performance, I've worked with high school, undergraduate and graduate students to perform this work. The Unknown and the Unnamed not only works to share narratives of how we are collaborative beings, but through the research, rehearsals and staging of the performance, the work itself enacts community. I was an artist fellow at Epicenter in Green River, Utah, a rural town of less than 1,000 residents. Through this residency, Epicenter supports socially engaged contextual practices that navigate the borders of art and design, creativity and community service, working to recontextualize the narrative of rural places. Localized Gestures is a 7-minute video that I shot and edited that explores how we use our hands as a form of relation, affection and solidarity. In an essay by artist, curator and educator Christopher Lynn, he writes, "Lyon's work in Green River falls into this category that is part social anthropology and part representational narrative that reflects back histories, characteristics, and stories to help archive and solidify collective civic identity." End quote. In making Localized Gestures, I walked the streets of Green River, using my camera as an initiator for engagement. I met, talked, and captured over 170 of the community's waves. Localized Gestures was then screened at the annual Green River City Picnic and was projected around the town. The video offers a way for the Green River community to see themselves collectively and makes visible a local ethic, with an understanding and consideration of the enmeshed histories of photography and ethnography. This work shares a semi-anonymous typology of the people of Green River, with the aim of prompting people to move beyond the individual into a larger social world. The next project I'm going to talk about is a collaboration with feminist writer and artist Carmen Wynant. Breaking Water centres on the human experience of ecological grief. Carmen and I asked, how might experiences with water signal a shift in consciousness, away from helplessness, denial and paralysis towards something like awakeness and action in addressing ecological imperatives? The installation consists of 21 second-hand CRT televisions which sit on tables built from recycled timber. The TVs formed a circle around the viewer as they entered the space. The audio component shares a recorded narration projected from the ceiling towards the viewer in the center of the circle. We collected found video footage in 3 main categories: water flowing, bursting, erupting, gushing, the rupture of the amniotic sac broken in the human body, a signal of oncoming birth, and dam walls exploding during river restoration projects, long-term collaborative projects that remove failing and unused dam wall infrastructure to reconnect river pathways. When thinking about using CRT TVs, we drew from artworks like Gretchen Bender's 1987 work Total Recall and Spencer Finch's 2007 work West, Sunset in My Motel Room. The recorded audio component of Breaking Water drew from a text that Carmen and I researched and wrote collaboratively, and the audio loops continuously and is 24 minutes long. The audio shares personal story alongside excerpts from environmental organisation reports like American Rivers, through to central text that influenced our thinking, including Australian feminist theorist Astrida Neimanis's essay Hydrofeminism, or On Becoming a Body of Water, which brings together queer, ecological and feminist ideas to demonstrate how we are all constituted of and by water, and how water can be used to demonstrate our interconnectedness. When thinking through the audio component of the work, we drew from artworks like Ronnie Horn's 2021 monologue, Saying Water, which developed from her 1999 photographic project titled Still Water, the River Thames.
From the beginning, we have wanted to ask, can water transition us? What is the shape of collaborative action in the face of helplessness, denial, paralysis? How might we approach change as a matter of unlearning? What is left of me without the parts made in the image of colonization, racism, and patriarchy? What surfaces when I release the idea of myself as individual?
American Rivers. A powerful movement is underway to restore healthy, free-flowing rivers by removing dams that no longer serve a purpose or cause more harm than good.
In the centre of the TVs, a circular bench offered a place to sit, watch and listen. Inlaid in the bench was a collection of takeaway screen-printed posters. The poster was printed on recycled newsprint and drew from both the images and text in the work to offer a takeaway for the viewer. Through collecting the footage of dam demolitions, I watched and listened to Indigenous tribes, local communities, activists, scientists, governmental agencies, and environmental organisations watch dam walls be violently deconstructed, dismantled and destroyed. I witnessed ecstatic faces, crying, screaming, clapping, folks jumping up and down and embracing one another, sometimes all at once. I would describe this as an embodied collective joy. Through making this work, I've witnessed the potential of water to be emancipatory. When you fight for and with water, a collaborative effort, a moving beyond yourself, it looks like freedom. Breaking Water makes visible collaborative environmental actions that are dismantling dams that no longer serve a purpose, a form of anthropocentric waste tied to dominant narratives that attempt to command and control water, to the detriment of rivers and their ecological communities and most people. Curator Amara Antilla writes, by using the transition between life in the womb and life outside of it, and the liberation of waterways as metaphors for thinking about the kind of paradigm shift that is needed for individuals to become politically and socially mobilised, Lyon and Wynant engage in a radical reorientation of values and ethics, and prompt us to imagine a reality where we, like water, embody new modes of survival and resistance that are ever fluid, adaptable, and empowered. Remembering Future is a public artwork created for the Biennial Facade Commission at the La Trobe Art Institute in Bendigo, Australia. The work was installed on the facade of the building and was backlit during the evenings and early mornings, as you can see here. Remembering Future uses a counter-archival practice to investigate the impacts of gold extraction on the Indigenous box ironbark forest and woodland ecologies of the state of Victoria in Australia. Susan Lawrence and Peter Davies' book, Sludge, Disaster on Victorians' Goldfields, was really incredibly helpful in understanding this history of extraction. In Sludge, they write, in the 19th century, Victoria was the centre of the global resources boom, end quote. Box ironbark ecologies are considered one of the most endangered habitats in Australia. They are situated almost entirely within the Victorian goldfields. This region is called the Golden Triangle, an area aggressively and extensively mined during the Victorian gold rush. Scientists estimate that 83% of these forests and woodlands have been destroyed by colonisation, primarily through gold extraction beginning in the 1850s and then continued through settlement and agricultural practices. Only 17% of these forests and woodlands remain. This stereoscopic image was taken in 1865, 14 years after gold was discovered by colonisers in Victoria. This was all a forested area. Most of the imagery used in Remembering Future was sourced from state and national archives that make public settler colonial artefacts, drawings, paintings, illustrations, and photographs created from 1851 through to the early 1900s. These archives allow for the preservation and transfer of knowledge and simultaneously establish a state-sanctioned memory and history. As Nathan Muji Sentence, a Wiradjuri man, has stated on his blog Archival Decolonist, memory institutions, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums are not fucking neutral, end quote. Karen Cross and Julia Peck write in their special issue on photography, archive and memory, the point of critically analysing photography and its archives is to provide the grounds for a reconfiguration of knowledge, its ownership and modes of production. The motivation of the broader critique of photography and the archive is to make way for the expression of counter-memories. After learning more about box ironbark forest and woodlands, I became really interested in the history of gold mining and the impact it had on the ecology in Victoria. In the research paper Australia's Box Ironbark Forest and Woodlands, Max Kelly and David Mercer write, timber extraction for a variety of uses during the mining era was high, with licensed woodcutters and others producing wood for fires, shelter, whips and whims, puddling machines, sluices and water races. Mines also required timber for props to line the shafts and tunnels, and to feed the steam engines and furnaces, end quote. This image of the Ballarat goldfields was particularly shocking to me. Through this research, I came to understand the extent of timber felling that took place during this period, and that the treescapes of the goldfields today are characterised by extensive coppice regrowth. When writing about Forest Creek, the first site of gold discovery by Europeans in 1851, Peter Davies and Susan Lawrence write, almost every tree for miles in all directions was cut down to slab the mine shafts or feed the boilers. I became really interested in these details in the artworks. They offered a kind of evidence of these changes. By cropping the images, I focused in on the tree stumps. No longer did these images primarily document human life on land, but centred on the felled trees as the central characters. I undertook a process of collecting hundreds of tree stumps, cropped from these larger artist artworks. For me, seeing them together offered a powerful document that speaks to the extractive nature of hunting for gold. I then printed the images and began to arrange them as a physical collage. In the final collage, they make up the majority of all the images depicted and are interspersed with 5 other sets of images. Brett Cashmere writes, the archive is a site for creative intervention, one that enables new possibilities for preserving and representing individual memory within a larger historical consciousness. As artists, how can we use the archive to share critical perspectives, counter-perspectives? In other words, how can we use the colonial archive to counter colonisation and bring awareness to the harm it continues to deliver? Looking through the archives, there are many images of miners working above and below ground. I cropped the images tightly, and you can see they begin to degrade, the pixels and digital artefacts becoming visible, a sign that this once analogue image has been through multiple digital processes. I draw from artist and theorist Hito Sterl's term, the poor image, where she writes, the poor image is a copy in motion. Its quality is bad, its resolution substandard. As it accelerates, it deteriorates. It is a ghost of an image, a preview, a thumbnail, an errant idea, an itinerant image distributed for free. Squeezed through slow digital connections, compressed, reproduced, ripped, remixed, as well as copied and pasted into other channels of distribution. The poor image has been uploaded, downloaded, shared, reformatted, and re-edited. It transforms quality into accessibility. The image is liberated from archives and thrust into digital uncertainty at the expense of its own substance. End quote. In the overall collage, I placed the miner's hands on the outer edge of the work, interspersing them with images of the tree stumps. Side by side, we see the hands and the result of their actions. These three images, presented with an arrow, are from the Environment Protection Authority Victoria and are offered to the public to aid in the recognition of different types of historic mining waste in the Goldfields region. From top left, these include waste rock, or what is often called mullock, mining sand, worked alluvium, and calcined sand. I include these images because of the risks of mining tailings, which contain mercury and cyanide. Susan Lawrence and Peter Davies write that legacy tailings from historical gold mining may present ongoing risks as the industry used large quantities of mercury, with minimal environmental regulation to limit its discharge. Analysis of historical data on mercury uses in the mining industry in Victoria, Australia indicates that at least 131 tonnes of elemental mercury was discharged into the environment as mine tailings between 1868 and 1888. 130 tonnes in 20 years, with the total amount lost over the historic mining period likely to be much higher. End quote. I also incorporated images that reflect contemporary uses of gold today, including dentistry. Maybe a few of you here have a gold filling or two. This is an image of my mother's engagement ring, an image of my laptop, which contains gold in the plating of circuit boards. Gold is used in many electronics. And 20 kilometres away from where this work was installed at the La Trobe Institute, the Fosterville gold mine is actively extracting gold. This is a satellite view of the mine site. Gold mining in Victoria has taken an extreme ecological toll on water, land, animals and plants. While the dominant culture celebrates the removal of gold and its economic prosperity, much mining across a range of minerals and materials in Australia is happening out of the view of the public. I ask, how can we as artists make it visible? State of the Sky is a collaboration with visual artist Luke Stetner. Luke was invited to create a 2-year and 3-month installation at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a museum that exhibits across several buildings in the same neighbourhood. Our exhibition is at 516 Sampsonia Way. It's a 3-storey row house that remains relatively untouched since it was purchased by the Mattress Factory. Early in the project, Luke asked if I would like to collaborate with him on this exhibition. Luke is also working with 8 other collaborators, and the collaborators' work is all interspersed and it's not sort of situated or labelled. Luke and I's collaboration encompasses a functioning solar darkroom that draws on the sun to make photograms, and also as a site where Luke and I continue to create work, where we offer community workshops, where we run an artist residency, and in the summer we'll offer a summer school. The darkroom is used to create images for our 3-storey installation that shares images generated from the solar darkroom along with photographs, diagrams, and recontextualised archival material. A large portion of our time working on State of the Sky was spent at the archives and special collections at the University of Pittsburgh. We were specifically interested in investigating the history of time standardisation at the Allegheny Observatory and how this aspect of modernisation contributed to Pittsburgh Pittsburgh's environmental problems. State of the Sky works to share knowledge and foster restorative relationships to time, place, and community. William E. Schuurman has written that any attempt to make sense of the human condition must begin with the analysis of the social experience of speed, end quote. For myself, this research was a way to learn how our current conception of time has been shaped by colonial capitalist modernity. We organised a formal collaboration with the archive as they were really pivotal in making this work. The archive, we spent weeks in the archive looking through different collections, photographing, scanning, and note-taking. In the archives, we found many original documents that were important thematically to the exhibition, and we collaborated with the archive to loan 25 documents that we had framed and hung in the exhibition. The original documents were drawn from a range of different collections in the archive. We included 16 cartoons from the Fred Wright Papers collection. Fred Wright was born in 1907 and died in 1984 and was an American labor cartoonist and activist who created thousands of illustrations, illustrated news strips as a staff cartoonist for the United Electrical Radio and Machine Workers of America, UE, an independent rank-and-file democratic labor union. It was very rare to have a full-time cartoonist for a labor union at the time. Wright's cartoons focused on the politics and labour issues of the day. We specifically chose cartoons centring the interconnections of time studies enacted on labourers in factories, employer attacks, automation and environmental pollution. His cartoons were featured in newspapers, union publications and overseas union activism and wonderfully complemented aspects of our research. Photography played a role in speeding up the labour force, specifically as it relates to time studies. Artist and writer Jenny Odell's book, Saving Time, Discovering a Life Beyond the Clock, clarified how, quote, the clock we live by was built for profit, not people, end quote. The origins of the clock, calendar and spreadsheet are inseparable from the history of extraction, whether of resources from the earth or of labour time from people. Through the exhibition, we ask, how has time, its systems of standard units, grids and zones, and its structural relationship to power shaped everyday lives, both human and non-human? This is another original document that we loaned from the Allegheny Observatory collection. This document is titled State of the Sky during the year of 1878 to 79, and it was used by the Allegheny Observatory to catalogue fair days and cloudy days at the observatory's site. This information was used to determine how many days and nights it was possible to observe phenomena in the sky across a year. This is the document that Luke and I draw from for the title of the exhibition. For us, there are strong parallels between practices of observation of light and weather for astronomers and a photographer's relationship to light and weather when using the solar darkroom. Luke made this drawing based on the original document, which hangs at the entrance to the exhibition. Using this document, we requested that the Mattress Factory staff record the state of the sky daily across the 2+ year exhibition. This specific work centres Luke and my shared interest in practices of observation, how cloudy versus sunny days affect our solar darkroom exposures, and references the history of air pollution in Pittsburgh. Ironically, the original Allegheny Observatory had to be moved as air pollution was obscuring the possibility for observation. And for us, the Allegheny Observatory collection was a site to explore how practices of timekeeping were fundamentally changed by the impact of industry and extraction. In his book, Selling the True Time, Ian Bartsky writes, at noon on Sunday, on the 18th of November 1883, North American railroads created the modern era of public timekeeping. This work, titled Time Service, was Luke and I's attempt at mapping how this shift in timekeeping was enacted by the Allegheny Observatory and delivered to railroad companies, cities, jewelers, and individuals. Prior to this date in 1883, time was local. Most cities, towns, and the public used some form of local solar time. Each city set its own time based on the sun's highest position in the sky at noon. This local form of timekeeping was usually maintained by a city via central clock. Prior to this date in 1883, all cities' times differed from one another. This made it difficult for railroads to move goods between towns and states. On Sunday, the 18th of November 1883, standard railway time was enacted. This meant no longer telling the time by the sun. Instead, the Allegheny Observatory used sidereal time, which is based on Earth's rate of rotation measured relative to a set of fixed stars. The then director of the Allegheny Observatory, Samuel P. Langley, devised a way, made possible via the telegraph, to transmit that time to the railroads, where he began to sell time. This work attempts to simplify and make visual the complex systems of communication that were created to facilitate this major shift in timekeeping in the US. We worked with the Ken Kobus collection to make image typologies of trains and barges in the Pittsburgh area. Kobus's collection features images documenting the railroad and steel industries in Pennsylvania during the 1980s and early 1990s. Kobus was born in 1948 and grew up in Pittsburgh. He worked in the steel industry for over 40 years. He's an avid photographer, amateur astronomer, and enthusiast of railroad steel industry history. On the second floor are two large-scale image collages made up of contact prints that we printed in the solar darkroom. The images are drawn from the Harold Corsini Photographs collection. Harold Corsini, born 1990, died in 2008, was the official photographer for US Steel. US Steel, or the United States Steel Corporation, is the American integrated steel producer headquartered in Pittsburgh. At one time, US Steel was the largest steel producer and the largest corporation in the world. The University of Pittsburgh archives state that Corsini's photographs produced for the US Steel represent the essence of the steel industry. Included are interior and exterior views of steel mills depicting machinery, architecture, and surrounding landscapes. Employees are portrayed in varying aspects, from executive portraits to visual documentaries of steel production, end quote. The production and output of the US Steel would not have been possible without the railroad. The railroads were the central groups that pushed for time standardization.
In the first decades of the century, America was speeding up. Photography not only documented America's growing industrial might, it was put to work as a tool of the modern assembly line. In this speeded up world, factory owners looked to the camera to make their workers move even faster. Early in the century, Frank Gilbreth used photographs to break a worker's every action into the smallest units, revealing every unnecessary movement. He studied the fastest workers in order to teach maximum efficiency to everyone. In Gilbreth's cyclograph technique, he attached flashing lights to a worker's fingers to indicate the length of time a motion would take. Soon Gilbreth's photographs were changing the lives of everyone from golfers to oyster shuckers. Gilbreth observed that surgeons took more time looking for their instruments than they did in performing the operation itself. He suggested a new procedure. Keeping an eye on the incision, the surgeon would extend an open palm to the nurse and utter the now famous words, "Scalpel, please." Some accused Gilbreth of turning skilled workers into robots, but the bosses loved his techniques.
As I'm sure many of you already know, Pittsburgh has lived with catastrophic air pollution in varying degrees since the Industrial Revolution. Pittsburgh is known as the Steel City for its dominant role in the history of the US steel industry. On the first floor in the front room, we shared images of the archive that depict safety posters created by the steel companies, train accidents, and land degradation, along with images I took while undertaking a tour of the Carey blast furnace, a former blast furnace that was once part of the Homestead Steelworks. This helped me to better connect the research I was learning via image and language in the archive with an embodied experience of the scale of steel operations in Pittsburgh. On a shelf on this wall is a booklet that holds every newspaper article involved in the activist work of GASP, the Group Against Smog and Pollution. GASP was an important collection that we worked with in the archives. The Group Against Smog and Pollution was founded as a non-profit citizens group in 1969 by a group of 43 volunteers in southwestern Pennsylvania, working for a healthy, sustainable environment. Drawing from the GASP collection of newspaper articles, we worked with their materials to highlight the importance of their activist work. Luke and I animated several articles pointing to important aspects of their activism using photographs, collage, and drawing. This was a way for us to work through the archive and learn about the history of activism in the area. Walking up to the third floor, we transition the audience into the aesthetics of a darkroom. Stepping into the exposure room on the third floor, the public is greeted with a solar darkroom that uses Earth's most powerful light source, the sun. The room includes 3 exposure units and a workshop space along with installed artwork. To create the exposure units, we cut 3 holes in the roof of the museum, and via tubing, the sun's rays act as generators to make photograms. To move the light from the exterior of the building to the photographic paper, we used mirrored tubing used in commercial applications of skylights. This image taken during an early install test shows how natural light flowed through the tubing, and when the tube was fitted with a lens, how it fell onto photographic paper. Luke and I both have a deep love for the photogram. In the exposure room, there is a long desk for drawing, writing, and experimenting. Above the desk, we are hanging the materials we use to create our photograms. In the adjacent room, the chemistry area offers a space to develop and fix the latent images created by the sun. We built the darkroom installation so that we could offer workshops run by Luke and I and Mattress Factory educational staff, where the local community is invited to participate in free experimental and traditional darkroom practices. We held our first workshop in December 2023 with the Teen Art Cooperative. Since then, we've held 11 workshops. We also designed the darkroom to function as an artist residency, where Luke and I invite visiting artists to stay at the Mattress Factory residence and utilize the solar darkroom. Since the opening, we have hosted 7 visiting artists. For us, the darkroom counters the continuing acceleration of speed, offering Luke and I, community members, and visiting artists a quiet space for thinking and embodied ritual, where we draw on the gift of the sun and ask people to reflect creatively on how systems of timekeeping created for industry and profit has shaped our current experiences of time. Luke and I are currently designing Summer School, State of the Sky, a 12-week interdisciplinary artist-centered educational program that will be held within the walls of the exhibition this summer. The program will encompass 6 bi-weekly seminars. A different practitioner will lead each seminar, including visual artists, poets, filmmakers, and anthropologists, with the first and final meetings taught by Luke and I. The program will also involve twice weekly access to the exhibition Solar Darkroom, And the summer school will explore how galleries, archives, libraries, and museums, repositories of knowledge and power, can be used to reimagine dominant narratives. Through the creative translation of documents like newspapers, photographs, data, and other archival materials, participants will explore ways to unarchive and recirculate marginalised, contested, and unknown histories. Thanks so much, y'all.